Right, let's continue with our build-up to the State of the Nation address. Expectations are mounting for the President to announce some kind of direct support for those who, of course, have been left in the lurch because of things like load shedding. Let's continue capturing some of the sentiment around this. Take you live now to the Cape Town City Hall precinct. That's where we find our reporter, Govan Whittles, who's watching all these developments for us. And Govan, again, there's going to be a lot hinging on the President's address when he finally takes to the lectern today to speak about load shedding in a meaningful way, especially when you consider just how long we've been dealing with these power cuts.
There certainly is a lot of expectation. The real expectation is around the declaration of a state of disaster. As we said earlier, they were stuck on the question of whether they found a legal basis to declare a state of disaster. They had received legal advice at the Cabinet Lekgotla. There's also a lot of talk about some relief and possibly whether or not there will be some incentives declared for people who are either feeding power back into the grid or getting off of the grid. Those are some of the discussions at that ANC Energy Symposium. There were discussions around whether or not the impact of load shedding, which is being monitored by the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, should be responded to with some sort of, or with an allocation from disaster management funds. Last time they declared a state of disaster during the COVID-19 pandemic, they reprioritized 500 billion rand to respond to that pandemic. This time the question is around how much money they'll reprioritize, where it'll come from, considering the priorities that have already been set out by the government and their restated commitment to fiscal prudence. So they're in a tricky spot here, and the President will have to walk a tightrope when it comes to responding to the energy crisis. With us we have Minister in the Cabinet as well as the former head of the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee, Mmamoloko, Kubayi, to speak to us just briefly on a few issues. Minister Kubayi, we'll get into the load shedding issue. I'd just like to use this opportunity to ask you recently about this Constitutional Court judgment. They've shot down government's appeal or government's intention to appeal a judgment that found it was wrong to use BEE criteria to allocate relief funding during COVID for businesses that were in the tourism sector. That was, of course, your portfolio at the time. What's your comment on that decision by the Constitutional Court?
Yeah, I've not had time to read the full judgment to understand what has been the issue. Actually, I've lost track a bit because, as you know, I've moved and they always rule or norm that you try and allow your, successor to deal with issues. But just broadly around transformation, I think issues of transformation remains more critical. The policy around BBBEE is a critical one to be able to help us to address the injustices of the past. That can be questioned and that can be denied. I think major part of what we need to look at, and mostly over time what one has learned, I mean, you can look at even the procurement issues which the Constitutional Court has pronounced, has been around the gaps on the law that we needed to close. So more importantly for us, especially as in the ruling party who believes in transformation, we'll have to go back and look at around all these legislative tools that we have around transformation. Are they tightened enough? And are they very clear and specific for all of us to be able to embark on transformation? It remains a critical point, and one will pay attention to that so that we can look at the gaps and what the Constitutional Court has found. Because most of the time, they will be able to say, this is what your law says, and this is where the gap is. And therefore, the ambiguity, if there's any ambiguity that exists, then they'll flag it. And that's what we have, and together in our responsibility as lawmakers, have to close that ambiguity so that we are able to deal with it.
BEE and BBBEE obviously are receiving another vote of confidence from the ANC conference as being described as the mechanism through which they believe transformation could be best achieved. We're going into possibly another state of disaster now. The fact that the court has found that you can't use BBBEE to provide relief funds will probably have an impact on how they roll out any relief in a state of disaster for load shedding. But do you think South Africans can expect relief to come to them for the effects of load shedding, or will it likely be focused on trying to recapacitate Eskom to perhaps get more diesel, to buy more diesel to keep the lights on?
I think the main focus firstly should be, in my belief, and the discussion even from the NC, has been around finding mechanisms to stop load shedding. Because from members of the NC and from the public in general, is that if you stop the load shedding, you are able to allow them to live better and for businesses to thrive, for businesses to survive. So that's the major issue. I think I don't think even if we go into the state of disaster, you'll see the nature of state of disaster like you had with COVID-19. I mean, that time, and sometimes that's what people tend to think. In their minds, they remember, oh, shut down, not being able to move. I don't think it will be in that nature. Because we declared state of disasters, for example, when there are floods, for example, like we had in KZN. And then when that happened, it allows us to intervene in terms of time, in terms of speed and resources, as you say, gathering of resources to be able to respond to the incident that has happened. So my understanding and the discussion should be around that interventions, not in the full scale like you would have seen in COVID-19. That's not the same situation.
Lastly, just on human settlements. We saw earlier towards Sona in the weeks running up to this, some commentary from the Eastern Cape emerging, criticizing the lack of housing or the lack of the municipality's initiative to build houses. We understand the prerogative to build houses was placed under the curatorship of the province, but it does draw into sharp focus what the priorities would need to be in terms of actually increasing the number of houses built. Around this precinct, there are a lot of homeless people here. There's clearly a shortage of houses even in the Cape Town city. What's your view on how that should be prioritized? Look,
the issue of provision for human settlements is very critical. Firstly, around informal settlement, as I'll start here with Cape Town and I'll move to Eastern Cape as we made examples and global and the country around. When we look at here in Cape Town, for example, we've got quite a lot of informal settlements which do not even have basic services, what I call human rights, no access to water and toilets. It can be today, and that's my fight, that we've quantified about 16. We're working with the city. We're pushing for the city to do. We've asked them to reprioritize. They refused. And this is where the problem is, cooperative governance. When I raise the issue of functioning of municipalities, it's part of the problem now. In Eastern Cape, Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, for 2 financial years, they've not been building houses. They are given money. They were allocated. They were given the responsibility. As a developer, at some point, I had even to write a letter. It was Mayor Johnson, and then we are now proceeding and ask Prima Mabuyan to say, help me intervene. Otherwise, I will have to consider and request that their status of being a developer, being able to build houses, is removed because there was no building of houses. But what I've learned over time with the municipality, especially with the metros, is that with the coalition government, because there isn't currently a legal framework of coalition. I remember at some point I was in a panel and I mooted this to say we need to have a legal framework of ensuring that municipalities function in this coalition, because one week you have a mayor, the following week you don't have a mayor. This mayor arrives, have priorities to left, the other one arrives to right, in the middle of a financial year, in the middle of projects, others stop projects. So it's part of the problem we have in local government and having to have functioning municipalities. That actually we as human settlement gets affected more, because for us to have human settlements functioning, we need a functioning municipality, because the plans have to be approved by municipality. We have to work together to provide services. If we build, they must have water, they must have electricity and all those things. And that you need municipalities to work. That's why they must function effectively. So those issues, we currently sorting them out at MINMEC, where we sit with MECs. We're doing performance monitoring in there so that there can be level of accountability and transparency in the work. As I said when I arrived in the portfolio, my major issue is to try and bring, by the end of this administration, a human settlement portfolio that is transparent, that is more accountable to the people of South Africa.
Thank you so much, Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi, speaking to us here. Municipalities at the center of it. It's not by coincidence. It'll be a big focus of today's State of the Nation address. The ANC targeting 42 municipalities across the country, which they want to intervene in. We understand they'll send senior representatives of government to those municipalities to respond directly to them. Minister Kubayi also speaking a lot about cooperative governance. That's going to be at the center of that intervention on municipalities. Of course, she wants a more transparent human settlements department. There's only about 15 months to go until the national elections next year. So time is running out, and soon it will be time to reflect on whether or not she's met that objective. But it's all for now from the City Hall precinct here at the Grand Parade in Cape Town, coming to you live from where the State of the Nation address will be happening a little bit later on, and hope to bring you some more insights on what to expect from the speech, but also the expectations of the public.
And we look forward to all those discussions. For now, Govan Whittles, live to us there from Cape Town. Thanks very much indeed.